Hello and welcome back. And that's right, it's finally time to review this. This is a Minisforum MS-02 Ultra. From a brand like Minisforum, it's fast becoming kind of cliche to say that their latest solution is over the top, but even by their frigging standards, this thing is insane. But before we even get onto the pricing, before we even get onto the hardware capabilities, who the hell is this thing for? You've come to this video for a review, but I'll tell you right now, this thing has got such a wide-ranging remit in terms of end user, I don't think any singular video you're going to find on YouTube is going to cover it. This is going to be great for video editing. It's going to be great for software engineers. It's going to be great even for mid-tier PC gaming. I'll get onto that more later on. And when it comes to network attached storage implementation or local AILLM deployment, hell, there's a hell of a lot to look at here. We're going to be making a separate video, by the way, where we're going to be looking at this thing being deployed solely as a NAS solution and as a VM solution. And we're going to roll in some AI stuff as well. We'll talk about that more at the tail end of the video. But if you are looking for that kind of thing, this might not be the review for you. And I'd recommend, again, things like Jeff Geerling there. If you want to go to craft computing, almost certainly they're going to be touching on AI a lot more than this video will. I'll also touch on that I'm not going to be talking about the 25 gig networking in this video, as I'm still in the process of fleshing out my 25 gig network here around the studio. Currently, we had 2.5 gig, 10 gig, and 40 gigabit networking thanks to these cards. Unfortunately, the cabling for this does not work directly into those, and I could deploy these inside. I want to test this in a 25 gig environment because of those ports. So that's going to be included in the NAS video. But enough about that, let's crack on with the review. Now, the lowest configuration of this device is currently not available to be purchased. The Intel Ultra 5 variation with a 235HX CPU, although it is listed on their pages, availability doesn't seem at the time of recording to be global or indeed across any of their sites. Right now, it's the Ultra 9 variations. Now, at the top end, the one that I've got here on the table, that takes advantage of the 285HX CPU. That arrives if you don't get it with the memory, but you do still get it with the network card on its own with no storage, no RAM, 1,199 at the time of recording. If you want to add RAM and you want to add storage, you're looking at $1,499, not a cheap PC. It was supplied by Minisforum for this review. They haven't paid for this review other than obviously supplying the hardware, and they did see the review the same time as you. But for the sheer hardware inside there, once you leverage that in terms of your spend, it's kind of pro rata in a way. Now, if you go for the non-285 version, you go for the 275HX CPU configuration, you will miss out on 25 gig networking by default and the additional two M.2 NVMe slots. But for that, the entrance comes in at $949 without memory or storage, or $1,239 for a 1 TB storage drive and 32 gig of memory. But the pricing fragmentation goes even more into overdrive when you try to go for the model that includes ECC memory there, because I mentioned this supports it, but even this unit I've got here that Minisforum have supplied is not arriving with ECC memory because of, let's face it, pricing and availability of memory at the tail end of 2025 is absolute DS. It's awful. And right now, if you want to get the model from Minisforum that arrives with ECC memory, because they're not doing it in small quantities on their product pages, man alive, you're going to have to spend through the nose. So just be aware that the Ultra 9285HX variation, although it supports ECC, it doesn't arrive with ECC. Very important. Next up, let's talk about design. This is not taking advantage of the same design internally, or indeed in some cases externally, to that of the MS-01 Max that we talked about a month or two ago. This takes advantage of a whole new build inside there with a ton of ventilation on all sides and a really aggressive vented chamber here in the middle that we'll talk about a little bit more later on during the thermal, noise and power consumption testing. I will say though, with this device, in terms of port and connectivity, this is pretty up there. We've got a couple of 80 gig USB 4 V2 ports on the front. Those are Thunderbolt 5 in all but licensed name. It's got 3 10 gig USBs, one on the front, one on the rear. Alongside that, we have got a 10 gig network port and a 2.5 gig network port, both of which are their own individual controllers there. And finally, we've got our two 25 gig network connections there on the base. Now, one thing I want to talk about with those connections is they are delivered via their own dedicated card. That 25 gig dual port card with two M.2 NVMe slots on board that card. That's why the Ultra version, the Ultra 9285HX version, has those extra two M2s and the 25 gig. It includes that card. Now, Minisforum told me they are going to be selling that card on its own very soon. But as I've mentioned in another video on my first impressions, I love that card. It's not the first time we have seen combo cards roll out in the market. Here's examples here. This is one from Acer Store. Here's one from Synology. QNAP, I've got a whole bunch of them. Now, these allow you to have a 10 gig port and a couple of M.2s. This one at Gen 3 times 4 speed, I believe, and these at Gen 3 times 4 as well, although this is a times 8 card and this is a times 4 card. Now, combo cards exist, but I personally have never seen a 25 gig dual port and M.2 NVMe Gen 4 SSD upgrade card. The card has E810 Intel 25 gig network controllers on board, and again there's the dedicated RTL8127 10 gig controller alongside standard 2.5 gig networking controller inside there. There's even Wi-Fi 7 on board with its own two antenna there on the front. Again, you've got Bluetooth on there as ever. Ultimately, it means that you've got when I had this connected up, I could have had the two potential 25 gig connections alongside the 10 and the 2.5 gig. I was even able to achieve out of the box via a Wi-Fi 7 router 5.6 gigabit per second wireless connectivity as well in relative close proximity. This thing is absolutely raining bandwidth. And circling back to storage, the two M.2 NVMe's inside, according to the specifications on the documentation, the two on-board M.2s are Gen 4 times 4, and the two M.2s that are located on the PCIe card are Gen 4 times 4 each, unless you use larger than 4 TB SSDs, in which they've cycled down to 3 times 4. Now, we'll come back to the BIOS and PCI lanes a little bit later on, but when I did this during my own testing, one of the SSDs I put in the bay inside actually gave me Gen 5 times 4 speed. That is significantly higher. The other one, Gen 4 times 4, but at the same time, in exactly the same setup there, because I didn't play with the BIOS, I didn't play with anything, the two slots on the M.2 that should have given me Gen 4 times 4 and Crystal Disk Info showed me 4 times 4 were only giving me 3 times 4 speed there. Now, I know I could have played around in the settings, but this out of the box still gave me those gen speeds for each of the SSDs. Now, they did still deliver on all of that performance. So, for example, the Gen 5 SSD that I put inside the slot there, that gave me 12.3 gigabytes per second over 12.5 gigabytes per second in Crystal Disk. When I went ahead and tested the Gen 4 SSDs, the Gen 4 SSDs gave me 6.1 gigabytes per second over 5.2 gigabytes per second. And the Gen 3 SSDs respectively gave me 3.5 gigabytes per second over 3.4 gigabytes per second there. Hi there, Future Rob editing this video here in a coffee shop. Apologies for using my phone as the microphone. So it turns out the issue was purely my own fault here. I didn't spot a crossover on the PCIe layout chart I had with regard to the Gen 5 SSD and the speed allocation on a separate slot being used by the card. And that was why both the SSD that I put in what was supposedly a Gen 4 slot was showing as a Gen 5 drive, but at the same time, those Gen 4 drives were capped down to Gen 3. That's why that all happened. And again, maybe they could have been clear on the spec pages here, but that is how that occurred. Let's go back to the video. I will say straight away, the BIOS on this are pretty bloody detailed. They give you pretty much everything you're going to need in terms of controlling the fans, going ahead and playing around with some of the bifurcation. So, for example, the slot that the PCIe is on, you can chop that up to times 4 times 4 4 times, or keep it at the times Gen 4 times 16 that it's already allocated to out of the gate. Also, another cheeky little setup thing that I noticed, this thing has a Gen 5 times 16 slot, but it's not occupied by that upgrade card. You've got two more PCIe's. One of them is Gen 5 times 16 speed in a mini PC. And I know this isn't strictly mini, but it's not exactly massively desktop. Look at the size of my head and ear. Having 5 times 16, the things you could do. But then the other one, which is a Gen 4 times 4 slot there. So still a huge amount of bandwidth. But if we're going to talk about PCIe's, it is also worth remembering the amount of space you actually have to play with. I think it's very easy for us to forget that right now, in terms of PCIe, say for example you wanted to go for a graphics card Obviously, something like this, and we'll come back round to this in a moment, is never going to fit inside this. So your kind of maximum capacity size is kind of that. Think of the size differential between these two cards. Now, the reason I bring that up is because smaller cards often will actually work out pretty bloody expensive because of the scale down. And although you could get something like a 7600 XT graphics card, and again, that's about a year and a half old at this point in terms of optimal use, the number of graphics cards you're going to get to use inside this, or even make the most of that Gen 5x16 slot at the time of recording, is actually less than you might think. That x16 slot is pure future-proofing at that. And if we slot it out of the casing there, and we have a look at those slots inside, you do not have a lot of room. It does arrive with power connectors, by the way, so if you do use a graphics card, you do still have the power to deliver there, but just keep in mind, this thing has spent a lot of time developing that space because there ain't a lot to play with. And while we're talking about space, I don't know whether to be mortified or impressed, but they've gone and got the PSU inside. That's a 350 watt internal PSU. No one, I repeat, no one would have been angry at these guys if they'd gone external PSU. It would have just made sense. They've gone for external PSUs before when it's come to a lot of the MS-01, the MS-A1, A2, all of those have had external PSUs. They've actually managed to get it inside there and have those extra power connectors, those larger cards. So again, I think I'm going to say bravo Minisforum on that. This thing even has a spare USB 4 port on the rear, not just those 80 gig ports there on the front, which by the way, I connected a Gen 5 SSD via an adapter there on the front and comfortably got 6 to 7 gigabytes per second throughput on those ports. There's no limitation. But as the surgeon said when the nurse handed him the scalpel, it's what's on the inside that matters. And when we look inside this casing, although it's not quite as smooth an ejection as we found in the other Minisforums, at this scale there isn't really the nice little hook pull-out we've seen before, I will say the cooling system on this, I mean, it's going to have to work in overdrive, but fair play. This thing, for all of my testing, has done bloody well. To put that into perspective, let's start with noise first, shall we? I did 4 different noise tests. Now, keep in mind, fan control, I didn't really find it much outside of BIOS. I used fan control, a nice little freeware application, and I wasn't able to do much in the way of controlling the fans manually within an OS. Maybe a different OS, or if I'd gone for something like Proxmox on this, I might have had a little bit more control. I've not had a chance to do that yet. But I will say, while playing around with some of the RPM speeds and the fan level and balance between performance and efficiency and more, noise levels on this, I'm not going to say it was quiet, but it was less than I thought it was going to be. Now, for a change, I'm going to start with the highest audio level and work backwards because I think that's important for relativity here. I went ahead and played with the BIOS settings there to get it up to full performance, full fan RPM mode there, and then during my benchmarks, took some of the noise levels in terms of loud. And when I had the system on the highest settings, it was hitting 45 to 46 dBA. Now, that sounds high. Take my word for it, in a system of this scale, that is incredible. Given the number of fans inside this and the hardware we are talking about. Now, when I set the fans to a lower audio level, let's call it mid for the case of argument here, and again, that was a system from the BIOS there with the RPM of the fans responding accordingly, I got an audio of about 40 to 42 dBA rating there. So again, pretty darn good. And when I set the fans to their lowest, their quietest mode, I got it as low as 38 to 39 dBA. Now, bear in mind, those last two was when I was using the drop-down menu. What about when I played with the individual fans? Something you shouldn't really do, and I don't advise anyone doing, but for those that are really concerned about the noise from the multiple fans dotted around this system, I got it down to 31 to 32 dBA, which again, for a system of this scale, was really impressive. Not advisable, but I thought I'd include it anyway just to let you know the level of control you have. But keep in mind, I wasn't able to get full fan control and RPM control of any meaningful degree outside of BIOS, at least in my testing. So how did that translate into thermals? When I had the fan set to balance mode, I ran the device for about 24 hours non-stop, just doing different processes, running a game and leaving the game Sons of the Forest on in the background, just in standby, and came back to it the next day. Now, in terms of thermals, it played out as follows. After that period of time, the front of the device got to around 33 to 36 degrees there via the thermal imaging camera you can see. The side of the chassis, either side, again, hotter obviously towards the bottom where the PSU was, but it was around 33 to 35 degrees, and 33 to 35 along the top panel as well, with tons of ventilation, as you can see, with lots of passive airflow working alongside that vented chamber in the middle. Now, the rear of the device is where it got hottest, unsurprisingly, with around 42 to as high as 48 around the individual connections. I had it connected via the 2.5 and the 10 gig connection. And finally, along the base near the PSU, we saw around 41 to 43 during that sustained period there. Again, you can see that the cooling chamber in the middle is doing its job. And I was really impressed with the temps there. Now, with the SSDs that I mentioned earlier on, it is worth highlighting, you're going to need very low profile heat sinks for the two SSD bays inside. The two SSDs on their own dedicated card there, the Minisforum card, has already had a dedicated heatsink on board. But the two additional ones there, just keep in mind, and it does arrive with heatsinks in the kit, by the way, you can't go big on those. And especially if you're going to go for SSDs that arrive with a pre-attached heatsink, I wouldn't really recommend that here. And actually, while we're talking about cooling, an interesting little quirk. If we talk about memory, on the base of this system, you can see those two DDR5 SODIMM slots there. Now, the 4 slots are actually separated on either side, and you can't make it out here, but hopefully the images on screen will show you. There are 2 more SODIMM slots located just behind the CPU in that ventilated chamber throughout the middle with the 2 fans. So much so, in fact, that they've actually provided a custom-made heatsink that attaches directly onto a controller, one of the network ICs, and directly onto the SODIMM panel. I've not seen heatsinks attached to SODIMMs before in this manner. I can only assume that the amount of air passing through there must have been flagged somewhere in the testing where they knew they had to provide some kind of dissipation there to stop that becoming a heating problem. Nevertheless, it's just nice to see that they at least provisioned for the additional heat factor that's going to be appearing over those SODIMM blocks. And for those wondering about power consumption, well, I'll tell you right now, if you've got the system with the 25 gig card installed and anything connected to it, not even actively being used, the CPU at under 5%, the system was still regging between 53 and 55 watts power draw there, much higher than I expected. Now, if you remove that 25 gig card, or don't plan to use it and disable it, then from there you can get as low as 36 to 37 watts utilization. Now, when I had the system up and running with the card inside not being used, and just general system sat in idle for general desktop use, then it was around 35 to 36. So again, if the card's not being used and the SSDs aren't being used, the card won't be a problem. Now, what about when you're utilizing the system, a little bit more extensively? Well, using Cinebench, I was able to take advantage of just one core of the CPU, and that gave me a rating, once again, of around 65 to 67 watts utilization. Finally, if you're using the whole CPU, as you can see here on screen, again, Cinebench absolutely slamming it, get ready, because this was hitting in excess of 200 watts power consumption. Now, it will dip, as you can see during the testing on screen, but the reason it was dipping in and out, of course, is because Cinebench was scaling down on each of its tests. But 200 watts on a mini PC, heavens to Betsy. Now, those numbers are pretty standard numbers if you would compare them against a larger desktop equivalent to this device. And we're just not used to seeing those kind of crazy town banana pants numbers on a mini chassis system. A big part of that, of course, is that CPU, that AI-focused Ultra 9 there. Now, again, 12 cores, 12 threads to play with there. It's got 8 power cores, 16 efficiency cores, running at 5.5 gigahertz per second cap when needed. And the Intel AI NPU at 3 tera operations, and I think it's a little over 2 gigahertz GPU integrated graphics, or iGPU. These are great specs, but you can't expect that kind of hardware specification to not have a knock-on in terms of power consumption. There's a reason they've had to put a 350 watt PSU inside this bad boy. Let's talk about that graphical capability here, because there's going to be some users wondering just how good the iGPU or integrated graphics is here. Just how much are they going to need graphics cards on this. And I would say, unless you're a high-end gamer, you're going to do well. I think in terms of the AI support on this, that Intel Ultra 9 is already a great CPU, but of course, it's the software you use that really makes the most of it. We'll talk about that in the follow-up video. We've already done some of our benchmarking there. Graphical benchmarks were as follows. We ran Cinebench for 10 minutes on a multi-core test, and we saw scores there at 34,059 points, and CPU single-core testing there at 2,271. Very respectable numbers for a smaller compact desktop PC running on integrated graphics. Now, talking of graphics, let's move over to the gaming side of things. We did some gaming tests and some benchmark tests. For the gaming, we ran Sons of the Forest and Street Fighter 6. And it may look a bit noisy, the footage there on screen. Unfortunately, I did have to use a couple of KVMs because I was out of office quite a lot. So I apologise for the noisiness of the footage. But I'll say we were able to run both games at 60 frames per second if we ran it at medium settings. That's really important because if you are looking at higher end gaming, particularly anything even close to pro esport or even just generally want the highest fidelity, you are going to need a graphics card here. The same goes, by the way, if you were going to try and go ahead and use some of the benchmarking tools for yourself there. In terms of PCMark, we were able to crack 7,000, more precisely 7,107. And that was with no upgrades on the system. And when we were using graphical benchmarking, we saw Solar Bay Extreme. It was just terrible results, at just 906. But the minute we went for the Solar Bay entry-level test, it scored at an interesting and I would say impressive 7,659 and 29 frames per second there, based on the internal integrated graphics. Same goes for Steel Nomad. The minute we tried to use it without any kind of graphical assistance, any graphics card, it was just a lowly 405. But the minute we tried to go with a graphics card, it hit 5,575. Some of you are going to wonder, why am I including tests where there was a graphics card in the benchmarking? Normally I wouldn't. Well, the reason I bring it up is this system, although it's got a very small compact PCIe slot there are some smaller factor graphic card upgrades, but again, the number of options you've got are limited in the market. Again, 7600 XT is probably the one that I've used a few times via eGPUs, but interestingly, there are eGPUs in the market. You can take advantage of things like this. This is the Ustar AG02, supplied by WhatGeek. We've got a review coming up on this very soon. And again, bigger, bulkier cars. This is 7900 XTX. This is Nexus Station AI NAS, something we're currently reviewing at the moment. Thank you for supplying the card. And when we had these connected, that is how we were able to get to those incredible numbers. Now, what that means, the point I'm making here is this is a scalable solution in a number of ways. In its default model, it's impressive. It is not going to facilitate every use, but it's just how scalable it is, both inside via the PCIe's and because of the preponderance of USB 4 ports on here, things like docking stations where you're not just going to be reliant on Oculink. Some docking stations like this one are usable just via Thunderbolt without the need for an Oculink port. And doubling down on that, we could talk about those 25 gigs because let's be honest, 25 gig isn't that common. It's not like 10 GBE over copper where you can just sub out your existing CAT network and go towards 10 GBE. When it comes to 25 GBE, you need specialized SFPs to be utilized there along with your existing cabling. However, 2026 is going to see a number of quite affordable 25 gig switches arriving on the scene, as well as things like this from QNAP. This is their USB 4 to 2x10 gig. They've got a 25 gig variation of this on the way, and although theirs is almost certainly going to be quite expensive, alternatives are going to rock out that are going to bridge M.2 and USB 4 boards to allow 25 gig to likely be significantly more affordable. And that's what I mean about coming back to that scalability here. This is a mini PC that is incredibly scalable over time in terms of the PCIe connectivity, in terms of the baseline on-board connectivity, in terms of the memory scalability. Just generally about it for a mini PC, which in the subject of mini computers and mini PCs or workstation, mini shuttle computers, whatever, we are so used to having our wings so clipped and not able to access larger components This thing manages to buck the trend just a wee bit and allow scalability in a shape or fashion that's just not seen before at this scale. There are 3 PCIe slots. Name me systems this big with 3 PCIe's. I'll be amazed you can get a 5. It ain't all rosy. Again, fan control not being native and easy accessible, although we're kind of getting used to it with Minisforum. Again, maybe someone smarter than me is going to do a better job and find fan control more conveniently. I wasn't able to control the fans with ease. Also, the pricing is a bit all over the place. I know some of it's not their fault because of RAM and stuff like that, but this is not an affordable box in a way that the MS-01, we got so used to that device being weirdly affordable for what it was. This might be namesake 1 generation up, but it is a different kettle of fish. It's an incredible work of art, and we've already looked at that map out of the PCIe, which has hopefully been on screen throughout the course of this, but I will not say this device is not at its best without tinkering. This requires a level of playing around that some users may not be used to when they go for mini PCs, where there is a feeling where it should be good to go out of the gate. By no means complicated, but I will say this is for the enthusiasts. And whether you're watching this video because you are looking to scale up towards AR utilization, or maybe a Proxmox build, again, something we're going to be doing in a follow-up video, this is not for the faint-hearted. That price tag, it's not just going to put off, entry-level users, but I think the hardware configuration and the ability to tweak this bugger up to the maximum capabilities is definitely not going to be for everyone. But who am I kidding? This thing is now going to become the center of my 25 gig network testing. As 25 gig becomes more available and more affordable in the next 12 to 18 months, this thing is going to earn its place in my network setup there. Do I love it? I really, really do. I think Minisforum have just done kind of hit after hit after hit. And although this one is arguably quite a jump from what we've seen from them, I do think there is a target audience for this, unlike when they did that R1 recently, where I did wonder who was that for. But is it for everyone? Sod no. The pricing, the hardware architecture, and this thing's real value is that scalability. And if you don't think you're going to have that need to scale out, I would recommend going for the MS-01 every single time, or maybe even that A2. 2 great smaller systems than this that arrive with a great base level hardware, although do trim things back on the scalability. This is designed to scale out down the road, and that's the big takeaway. But there you go. That is the MS-02 Ultra, a wildly OP solution for some. Let me know what you guys think in the description below. As I say, or we're going to work on a follow-up video on this. We're going to be utilizing NAS software, utilizing Proxmox, and we've already started the Geekbench tests for running LLMs on this device. Because for me personally, yes, it's expensive, but as a NAS, once you factor in ECC memory, once you factor in the network connectivity, once you factor in the 4 M.2 NVMe's inside there, and you factor in the CPU and the PCIe scalability, this thing is better than a lot of NASs that I talked about in the last 18 months that cost a lot more than this thing's price tag. But stay tuned for that video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.